Alright, well, I guess I'm showing you guys how to do a caliper on the Eclipse today because I already replaced the front right here because it seized up on me, and now the rear right's seizing up on me. So obviously I'm doing the rear here, but it's the same process, front or rear. It's just your front caliper is a little bit larger. The bolts might be different size, but it's the same process. So loosen your lug nuts about half a turn each. With your lug nuts removed and it's securely supported on a jack stand, go ahead and take your wheel off. If it sticks, you get a big 4x4 piece of wood. I mean, you can use a little section of a 2x4 and a regular hammer in a pinch, but it might take you forever. I prefer a 4x4 block with a mini sledge. Tap all around on the edge of the rim there, and it'll break it free from your hub here. Sometimes they stick. So since I'm replacing the whole caliper and the caliper bracket here, I could just take this whole thing off. However, I'm reusing the pads, so I still need to get the pads out. In which case, I'm just going to take the caliper itself off here first. So this bolt, that bolt, if you were taking the whole thing off, you just got two bigger bolts. One's under there, and then there's a matching, goes into the bracket on the bottom. If you're just doing pads, you just take the caliper off. If you're changing the rotor, you're going to have to take all of it off, but it's still easier to remove the pads if you take the caliper off first. And of course, you're replacing the whole thing has to come off. But I'm reusing pads for now. I do have brakes I'll be upgrading later. All four corners, but for now, I'm just putting these pads back on with the new caliper. After you got the bolts out, you can just kind of pry up on it in a few different places to loosen it there. And slide it off. There's the caliper. Never let it dangle from the brake hose, and try not to bend that too much, or you can damage that internally and cause a similar symptom. This will collapse internally, and then you'll have the same sticking brake problem. You can see mine's pretty old and nasty there. It's probably the original caliper. Pads come out similar fashion. Just pull them out if they're stuck. Pry on them with a screwdriver. Here I'm just checking whether my issue is the caliper or the brake hose itself. Put an old pad in front, use a C-clamp like this. As you can see there, it's pretty stiff. So if you hear a creaking sound, it's almost always the caliper seizing up there. If you crack the bleeder valve and then it's still super stiff like that, nothing changes, then it is in fact the caliper. However, if you crack the bleeder valve and then it's easy to push in, then it's your brake hose. Alright, so to detach this brake hose here, I'm going to have to use a open-end wrench, although that's most likely going to slip if that's very tight at all, which it likely is. So what you want to use is if you have them, or if it starts to slip on you, I suppose worst case scenario, you could try to lock some channel locks on there and get it. But ideally a line wrench is what you're going to want to use so it doesn't slip, yet you can still get it over the hose. So once you break it free, twist the caliper off the line. Do not twist the line. Next, remove the caliper bracket. Reinstall the caliper assembly. You can see here I had the brake hose tied up so I didn't lose a bunch of fluid. When you reinstall it to the back of the new caliper, make sure you install the included copper washer. Insert your new brake pad retaining clips. Push in the brake pads. And then finally slide the caliper over top. Once everything's bolted up properly, now you will need to bleed the brakes. But before you start, make sure the cap is off the brake fluid reservoir. Make sure you're full of brake fluid. I generally like to go a little over full since I know I'm going to lose some. So the person on the inside of the car is going to start it. Make sure, well, if you drive a stick, you know to make sure it's in neutral. So then to pump the brakes, you're going to press down on the brake over and over. Nice and slow like that. You don't gotta go too slow, but you don't want to just put it clear of the floor. Some ABS systems, you could trick it into thinking it has a blowout, and then it'll shut out that line. It won't give you brakes to that line, so that's the reason for taking your time there. So you just pump it up and down 5-6 times, hold it to the floor firmly, And then when they crack the bleeder, it'll go to the floor. Continue holding it down firmly. They'll close the bleeder. Then you pump it again. You do the same thing over and over again until you get all the air out of the lines. Usually once it stops making a hissing sound, or you stop seeing air in the fluid, crack it a few more times after that and you should be good to go. Also, you'll feel that pedal firm back up as you get the air out of the lines. Throw your wheel back on and you are done. And here's a sneak peek of the next video on the Eclipse. It's getting the whole new front end. Hope to see you guys on that one.